Now, the best thing about doing a show straight after an election is that we can tell you things as they are, not maybe as we wish them to be, but every now and then there are just very clear facts. Now, you all know that this bloke has now been confirmed, reaffirmed and loved by the people of Western Australia, not just to be the Premier, not just to be the alternative Prime Minister of Western Australia, but of course the Emperor of Western Australia. And that brings me to the 5 things that we learnt out of Western Australia, including, number 1, it's always all about the leader. Now, yes, it matters whether you are Team Red, Team Blue, but let's be honest, this was Mark McGowan's victory. Mark McGowan was such a popular leader, and the polling was very clear that this bloke wasn't just going to win, but he was going to absolutely smash it. But we have now seen, in the post-pandemic period of time, that the popularity or lack thereof of the person at the top of the ticket is the ultimate decider about whether a government will be returned handsomely, get there just, or be swiped from office. So, the last news poll before the Queensland election, it showed a much bigger margin than two-party preferred. It showed Palaszczuk 56, Frecklington 30. The result, a lot stronger in favour of the Labor Party than the two-party preferred was showing. So it was all about the leader. In Western Australia, while most people thought that Labor would win, we weren't at 83 to 10, but that's crazy margin meant, again, it's all about the leader. It was exactly the same in New Zealand with Jacinta Price, the same about Trump in the United States in reverse, and of course even Michael Gunner and Andrew Barr in the 2 territory elections. So what about the standing of the Prime Minister? Now, even though they were behind in the polls according to Newspoll on two-party preferred, in the last federal election there was a clear lead and lean towards Scott Morrison. They went on to win the election. The most recent news poll, and we expect to get another news poll in the next 15 minutes or so, this number will be a little bit different for the most obvious of reasons after the news cycle in the past month, but by a more than 2-to-1 margin, the Prime Minister, 61, Albanese 26, and in other polls, don't know, is level with Albanese. But as I say, we'll get a new poll reflecting the media environment of the past month or so. Those numbers will change. So when you look at polls, in my view, forget two-party preferred, pay attention to the primary vote of the party, but the health of the leader is the health of the government. Now, for as long as I have been working in media, we have talked about presidential-style campaigns. That's what they are now. It is all about the leader. As Scott Morrison was able to ably show in the 5-week campaign in 2019, it was all about the leader in Morrison versus Shorten. It will be all about the leader, whomever will be there in the election next year. Second thing worth learning here too. Pandemic politics, well, it was the entire game. While they'll pretend that it was the management of this or the management of that, the truth is people love the leader who, quote-unquote, keeps them safe. The very simple lesson for the Prime Minister and the federal government here is that while all of these state leaders have been able to take massive victory laps because they're afraid of the virus coming from Melbourne, the reality is it comes in from overseas. It's time for the Prime Minister to almost every single day use as the same marketing line that these state premiers use, is that because of his decision to close the national borders, Australia has had the COVID response that is the envy of the world. Number 3. Now, they've changed the electoral funding system in Western Australia, and this is now going to see the Western Australian Liberals be able to send a whole bunch of money back east, despite the fact that, of course, the election was so much about the middle finger to Canberra, Sydney and everyone else. You get about $2 per vote, and based off the voting and counting that has happened thus far, still plenty to go, there is a 3-to-1 margin in the amount of Western Australian taxpayers' money that will go straight to the Labor Party versus the Liberal Party, and a huge bulk of that will be sent back east. So a massive money advantage. This matters a lot in terms of the ground game, in terms of what can be done in the Western federal election, or to help in places where maybe the money isn't there, like Queensland, like suburban Western Sydney. The fourth thing, minor parties are having real trouble at the moment. Where minor parties basically are in a world of pain. And I'll get to the state versus federal stuff in a second here. But they're in a world of pain because you are seeing now that the vote is moving away from the far left parties or the far right parties. Now, yes, it was just a little movement in Queensland, but 1.8% in Western Australia off the Greens meant they won't get anyone potentially even in the upper house at all. The One Nation story is even worse. You saw what happened in Queensland when they were off 6.6%, and in Western Australia they're off 3.7%. Now, this shows that, yes, there is a big chunk of both of these voters that are traditionally Labor voters that went back to the home team. But if it's all about the pandemic, and that is all people care about, because there's plenty of other reasons not to have voted the way they did, but it's all about the pandemic, it's all about pandemic management, then the minor party, the protest party, the foot-stomping stuff that was there in 2016 at the federal election, when 1 million people deserted the Liberal Party for a more conservative cause, it is not there right now. And finally, voters know the difference between state and federal politics. They know the difference. Now, put simply, while there's going to be a lot of politics which is now going to be spent where a lot of the money, like submarine contracts and the rest of it that went to South Australia, there'll be some panic spending that happens in Western Australia. Here's the deal. In 2019, Mark McGowan was the Premier of Western Australia. He had just won a very big election. Anastasia Palaszczuk was the Premier of Queensland. She had just won a big election. Yet in both of those states, people know the difference between their state and federal leaders. So one more time. It's all about the leader. The polling has shown that before elections and the result of. Pandemic politics, it trumps everything. And regardless of whether people like I like the idea of this being shut down or that shut down or the economy is more important, pandemic politics is everything. So the free kick for the government at the federal level has to be making people know, and yes, the press gallery will get bored with it, but they need to know the reason there is 4/5 of bugger all COVID in Australia is not state management, it is the federal management to say, no, we have shut ourselves to the rest of the world. The only people who can come back are Australians, and they go into hotel quarantine. The ALP has money that it can now send to the east. The minor parties are in genuine trouble right now, and I like, particularly in the upper house, having some minor parties that are able to keep the major parties a little more intellectually honest, and people know the difference between state and federal politics. But Emperor McGowan absolutely reaffirmed by a country mile, as we all knew would be the case in the Republic of Western Australia.